Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Radcast. I'm here with my colleague and co-host, Michael, who's in France. How you doing there, Michael?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Collective intelligence is near and dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to doing something radical.
Wonderful. All right, so let's give a concise introduction to radical collective intelligence. Feel free to jump in anytime, Michael, even when I'm screen sharing or talking, no problem. So just to give kind of a broad overview, the motivation behind radical collective intelligence is we need to solve certain concrete, tangible problems. Some of them are very complex, others are simpler, but all of them beckon for solution. Notably, refreezing the Arctic. How do we refreeze the Arctic? The Arctic is absolutely crucial to our survival. It provides both the mirror that reflects away the sunlight back into space, reducing the total heat load on the planet. And it also serves as a buffer for absorbing surplus heat, particularly in the summer months when a significant amount of Arctic ice melts, and then it refreezes over the winter. But we're staring down the barrel of potentially an ice-free Arctic this summer. So that air conditioner function of the northern hemisphere of the planet is severely threatened, as is the mirror effect. So for both those reasons, we need to refreeze the Arctic, as well as many other reasons. So that's one big goal that we have to solve. Others include cleaning up the oceans, deacidifying the oceans, sequestering carbon, healing and stopping the devastation, the destruction of the biosphere. So many problems. And some of these problems have engineering solutions, which then need to be funded, right? And which may need the support of governments around the world. So we're not just talking about, you may want to mute your microphone, Michael, by the way, Michael. We're not just talking about engineering solutions. We're talking about political solutions, cultural solutions, PR and marketing solutions, solutions to get the global movement rolling, to get all this stuff done in a very short time window, which is the time window we have. So that's the motivation behind radical collective intelligence. Now, how does it work? So to look at how it works, the basics of it, what we're going to do is we're going to first show a relatively simple example of a problem that can be solved with radical collective intelligence, and then we'll extrapolate from that rather simple example to more complex problems, ultimately leading to the holistic solution of all of our most daunting problems to the extent that they can be solved. I'm not one of these people who says, oh, everything can be solved with technology, but to the extent our problems can be solved, let's go solve them. So for starters, we're going to look at you remember that the simple problem I mentioned, which is, in this example, it's going to be removing ice from power lines, right? Obviously not one of the world's greatest problems, nonetheless a problem for power companies and their customers. But what's really important here, what I want you to focus on, is the methodology of how we generate solutions to this problem. And here we're going to show a portion of a video on the methodology called Brainstorming, presented by Dr. Tony McCaffrey on the Harvard Business Review website. And this brainstorming methodology we incorporate into radical collective intelligence. It's one of the main components. So let me show about a minute and a half of this video, and I'll pause once or twice to provide a little more detail. So we're going to start with a basic overview of brainstorming, and then we'll look at the specific example of removing ice from power lines.
Build upon. In a brainstorming graph, the goal grows downward into refined sub-goals. Resources are interacted together and grow upward. When the two directions connect, solutions start to emerge.
Solutions start to emerge. I'm going to pause here for a moment to show that. So on the bottom here these are resources. Each of these dots on the bottom are resources. And so these gray lines show the combination of resources. So this vertex here is a combination of resources. And then you see that combination is in turn combined with this other resource from over here. And you can imagine very complex pyramids, if you will, showing combinations of different resources to create a solution. These can be human resources, technological resources, natural resources. And then, as you can see, the goal is broken into what Dr. McCaffrey calls sub-goals, and then you'll see that those can be further broken down into sub-goals, etc. So let's look at the specific example.
Merge. Let's see how brainstorming would handle a classic management problem like this real-life conundrum at the company Pacific Power and Light. Winter storms in the Cascade Mountains leave power lines loaded with ice, which if left unattended will break the lines. Having workers climb the poles to shake the lines is both dangerous and time-consuming. Management searched for a better method for years. What if they had used brainstorming? To start, they would simply place the goal at the top of the brainstorming graph and a few known resources at the bottom. Then the group would be instructed not to talk, but to simply add post-it notes and drawn lines to the graph. People who are naturally top-down thinkers would start refining the goal. Other naturally bottom-up thinkers would analyze how the resources could be used, or they would add new resources. Pretty soon, the two directions would connect, an indication that the group is finding ways to use the resources to solve the problem. This figure shows a careful refinement of the goal, as well as Pacific Power and Light's actual solution of using the helicopter's downdraft to shake the lines enough to remove the ice. Other solutions are also shown, including using a helicopter to drop a de-icing agent onto the lines, and using the conducted electricity to generate enough heat to melt the ice on the outside of the lines. We don't know for sure.
Okay, so that's the gist of what I wanted to show about the methodology. So again, top-down thinkers work on refining the goal, what Dr. McCaffrey calls sub-goals. I call these ways. I think it's much simpler to say, look, these are simply ways in which to solve the problem or achieve the goal. And then from these ways highlighted in orange, they branch out into what I call subways and then sub-subways. So it's basically how are we going to do it, but without specifically identifying with what resources. And then the resources come up from below. And remember the previous graph where we showed all kinds of more sophisticated combinations of resources. That's the gist of it, okay? And so in the brainstorming methodology, Dr. McCaffrey talks about, don't talk, just use Post-it notes. Well, of course, we're going to do this on an online interface. And so people will be able to add, rather than Post-it notes, just add new boxes on the screen, on the interface, both for ways, subways, and also resources. And now, in addition to this sort of, very visual approach, to identifying ways and resources and ultimately solutions, just as we've seen here. We also add in a whole layer, which we call the conversational domain or the conversational layer. And what we mean by that is that the Radish platform facilitates people having conversations, very much like we're having right now, a recorded video conference, in fact, on any one of these different topics that we see here. See, each of these resources is a topic, each of these ways and subways is a topic. And just imagine for a moment a simple world in which our only unsolved problem is removing ice from power lines. Everything else is solved. We've taken care of greenhouse gases. The oceans are fine. The land is fine. The animals are fine. Everything's fine, except for ice from power lines. And so you can imagine as we get together to solve that one remaining world problem, you can imagine we'd use a map like this, and then people would get together and have conversations, recorded video conferences on each of these topics shown in the map, or perhaps on whole new topics. And so someone might get on and say, hey, there's a new way that we could do it. And, whatever, I'm just going to imagine some imaginary new way over here and other corresponding resources over here. So the way radical collective intelligence is going to work, and we're about to launch the first phase, the conversational domain. But the way it's going to work is that as people have conversations, and those conversations are the recordings of those conversations are transcribed into text, and then those transcriptions are indexed into the different topics and the different keywords that are often used in those topics. And we'll use natural language processing and whatever sophisticated artificial intelligence technologies we need to do that. So that, for example, if some folks are having a conversation about a new way to remove ice from power lines, the AI, the artificial intelligence would pick up on that and basically create a new topic here to represent that new way. And if that breaks down into subways, so be it. That would also be broken down into new topics over here as new resources are added and combinations of those resources are conceived. Those combinations would constitute new topics, et cetera, et cetera. And so all that has to do with mapping conversations to existing topics in what we call the toposphere. All this is part of the toposphere. And then separate from that, or part of that, is the conversations that are indexed and mapped to these different topics. In addition to mapping what is said to the various different topics, we're also mapping who said what. And that's very important because one of the functions of radical collective intelligence is sort of this matchmaking function where we connect people with each other and with conversations and with topics, so that we say, for example, all the folks who are talking about, heating up the outside of the power lines would have an ability to see who all the other folks are and to do these custom searches to find out in what conversations they talked about it and exactly what was said in those conversations that maps directly to heating the outside of the lines, for example. That with a view to helping really flesh out this way of removing ice from power lines. And if we dial back the video a little bit, I'll just mute it and kind of rewind a little bit so that we can see. So before any of these connections are made, we've got ways at the top and resources at the bottom. And let's say that no connections have been made yet between resources and these different ways of solving the problem. Then the AI might suggest that, okay, make strong wind if that's a way. Well, what resources map to that? Well, we've got fans, helicopters. Okay, looks like those two. So the AI may suggest a conversation between those who are talking about the way of making strong wind and those who are talking about the resources of fans and helicopters and say, hey, maybe y'all should get together and see if you can connect the dots, right? Which is literally what happens in the next phase. You see all these connections are being made between resources and ways. So the AI can facilitate all of that. And then, so kind of looking at it from a big picture, as I sketch it out here, you've got the conversational domain on the left, all these people getting together and having these recorded video conferences on all these different topics. Meanwhile, in the middle, you have not just one goal, like I was talking about, removing ice from power lines. Now let's look at the real world where we've got myriad goals. And let's just take a quick look at that, at what that might look like. So our big overarching goal is that we transform our world into a whole world, a world that works, a world that's healthy, that's complete. What does our world need to be whole? Well, we need wholeness for people and wholeness for the planet. So we start to break it down. And so this is an example of a teleological taxonomy. And these break down into more specific needs or goals. And this is just conceptual, but in the end, you can see this breaking down into these leaf nodes at the very bottom. So these leaf nodes that you see here, these are all the goals that we need to accomplish in order to have a whole world, including refreezing the Arctic, etc. So those leaf nodes are what you see up here in this portion, okay? Those are all the leaf nodes. So each of those leaf node goals then breaks down into ways of achieving those goals and all that. So, for example, one of these specific ones may well be removing ice from power lines, right? As well as myriad other goals. So folks work on breaking these down into ways of accomplishing these goals. Meanwhile, you've got resources at the bottom, operating, connecting, growing upward. And then the ultimate goal is, of course, that solutions emerge, which connect the resources to the ways of achieving these goals. And the ultimate goal is that we meet all of these goals, that we achieve all those goals. So the AI, the artificial intelligence layers, transcribe, map, index everything that's said here to all these different topics and suggest connections like, hey, you know, you all over here should get together since you're fundamentally talking about the same thing and you're very close to coming up with a solution. So why don't you get together and talk about it? And there's lots of ways that these connections can be made. So that's the basic gist of what we're setting out to achieve with radical collective intelligence, filling out the map of all the goals, all the resources, all the ways and subways, and ultimately all of the solutions that we need to co-create in order to solve all of our most daunting problems to the extent they can be solved, right? And so as these myriad solutions are conceived, then they go to the next phase, which we call global holistic modeling. And the basic idea there is that of all the different solutions that are conceived and say, oh, this could solve that goal. Oh, this other one could solve it too. Oh, cool. So could this other one. So for a given goal, you may have myriad solutions, myriad possible solutions. And of course, since we're talking about solving multiple goals simultaneously, it's important to note that certain solutions, like this one here, that's maybe designed to achieve this goal, it may have unintended consequences which impact other goals. In other words, it may release a whole bunch of hydrocarbons which negatively impact the goal of cleaning up the atmosphere. Or it may have positive unintended consequences or even neutral unintended consequences. So all of this beckons for us to apply a holistic modeling framework and methodology to simultaneously and holistically model all contemplated solutions simultaneously to come up with that optimal mix. I'll just write S's for solutions, to come up with that optimal mix of solutions that will holistically solve all of the problems and address all of the goals that we need to solve. And so what this modeling will generate is basically a scenario. If we apply all these solutions in this order, in this time frame, then what are the predicted impacts? Will we refreeze the Arctic? To what extent? By when? What resources will be impacted? What unintended consequences will emerge? How do we address those? And more generally, how does this entire set of solutions address all of our goals, utilizing our resources with maximum positive benefits and minimum negative consequences? That's the big picture. So radical collective intelligence seeks to achieve all of that. In this video, we seek to achieve presenting a general overview of the big picture. And with that, I'm ready to wrap up soon, but I wanted to let me just go on mute in case you have anything to add to that, Michael. All right, Michael, you're muted. All right, Michael may be busy at the moment, but anyway, for purposes of concision, I will stop the broadcast now. Thank you all for watching.
Muted.
Go ahead.
I'm muted. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Michael. Anything you want to add to what I just presented?
Nothing to add really, but I think it's so exciting, and I propose that we do a concise version of that we can simply build off of each and every time instead of returning to the same one. But until then, let's just keep turning them out.
I agree. Totally agree. Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining, Michael, and thank you all for watching.
Yeah.
And stay tuned as we develop this platform for radical collective intelligence. And I'd like to invite everyone to jump in and participate. Please sign up on radish.org And look out for future open public hangouts that we do that anyone can join. Join the conversation. Join the conversations, plural. We're going to have multiple series of conversations on myriad topics, all pointing in the same direction of how do we make our world whole again. All righty. Anything more to add, Michael?
Nope.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
And we'll see you soon. Arigato.